final presentation of mine. I thought that after talking to you about specific research topics that I've been interested in, that it might be interesting to talk about a more general topic, which is doing research in applied linguistics. And of course, it's my personal view, because anyone who does research in applied linguistics at whatever level, whether that is your BA research project or your MA dissertation or your PhD or any project beyond the PhD, everybody is facing similar issues. And of course, the expectations change slightly as you progress through your career. I would start by talk about some, I would say, almost philosophical issues about research. And one of the things that always struck me was that students tend to believe in predeterminism. They see these libraries full of books and these journals full of papers, and they can see the publication lists of certain researchers, and it's easy to think that these that this was destined to happen. And so that it was driven by God, fate, or some unknown force. So they tend to underestimate the fact that, in fact, nothing is predetermined. If you're a researcher, you could go in 1,000 different directions. You could ask 1,000 different questions, and you have a choice between a huge amount of methods. And so nothing of what actually is produced is predetermined. It's the result of free choice, free spirits trying to do something that they are interested in. And so I would say that it's crucial to hence realize that Lambert, Garner, Dornier, to mention three of the biggest names in motivation research in second language acquisition, that they weren't destined to introduce motivation. And I had a chat with Garner and Dornier, and they were kind of surprised to a certain degree by the fact that their papers seemed to have so much impact. They hadn't necessarily anticipated it. They were also interested in other things, but it was motivation that made their name. And so I quite like the little picture there about the PhD. It's if you're standing at the door deciding what to do for your PhD, it may look like a maze, and I totally agree. And I think that, in fact, the first year of doing the PhD is getting lost in the maze and getting a sense of just how big the maze is, and wander around without necessarily finding the exit straight away. So this research does not descend from heaven. That's really an absolutely crucial point. So it's not like Moses coming down the mountain with God's words. It's really the result of inspiration, hard work, sweat, and resilience. Resilience because things typically don't go right straight away. And in fact, any paper that you see published in a journal typically has been rejected one or twice, has been rewritten about 10 or 15 times. And the amount of work that the authors put into it is hard to imagine when you see a nice, neat little text that looks like a perfect finished product. Also, it's important to realize that the peer review system is fallible, meaning that not all good papers submitted to journals will get to publication because reviewers or editors may think it's not a good fit with the journal, or the reviewers may not like this type of research, or reviewers may have different opinions about what is important and what is original. So it's important to realize that if you submit something to a journal and it's rejected, never take it personally. It doesn't mean that you are therefore a bad researcher. Absolutely not. You have to develop resilience, and you have to extract useful information from the rejection letter. What is it that they didn't like? Why? Can you address it? If you can't address it, you know, sometimes it's better to throw away a paper that has some fundamental deficit. If you can adapt it and submit it somewhere else, please do. And sometimes good papers can get rejected because they challenge orthodoxy. So I remember talking to prominent researchers who, Albert Costa, the late Catalan psycholinguist, who was complaining that journal editors want, in fact, more of the same with small variations. So you add one little ingredient and you repeat what you have done before, because they know that that's a product that will sell, that will be appreciated. And he was angry that journals rejected the new papers he was writing on the foreign language effect, and that they wanted more of the old stuff. So I guess that researchers sometimes face the kind of issue that artists have, or singers, in that the public wants the good old tunes, the big hits, and they don't necessarily want to hear the singer's latest creations. Of course, if I say that papers don't descend from heaven, it doesn't mean that new theories appear out of nothing. So if you work on certain topics, it's because other people have preceded you in working on that topic, that teachers have told you about a certain topic or certain research questions. So the ground was prepared, and at that point you come in and you think, okay, what could I do to turn this into something original? Could I ask a question that hasn't been asked before? And sometimes you do manage to do that, and you end up reshaping the trajectory of a discipline. Now, this is a nice little conceptualization of doing research, where you collect data, you sort it, you arrange it, you present it visually, and you explain it with a story. And I would say that the crucial final step really is the explaining with a story, meaning that I desk reject quite a lot of papers submitted to my Journal of Multilingual Multicultural Development, because the authors have been through the first 4 stages. So they did collect data, they sorted it, they arranged it, and they did some visual representation. However, they did not come up with a good story. And any research paper, any dissertation, any project really, if there is no good story, then in fact it's a failure, because what the reader is interested in, or the audience is interested in, is a good story that is based on solid data, that has been properly sorted, that has been arranged following the conventions of the discipline, and that have been presented visually in order to understand or make a point. And then this needs to be embedded in a good story. And the thing is, it doesn't really matter what the story is about, but it needs to be a good story. Now, if you are an academic or you are a PhD researcher, you may have heard about the sentence, publish or perish. And so this is a nice book by James Hines. It's a funny book, really, about a young academic, a young American academic who faces that terrible pressure to publish in order not to perish. And so I think this is an important point, because once you enter academia and you become a researcher, you do realize that there is a huge amount of pressure on you to do so many things. You have to, first you finish your PhD, and then you have to do so much teaching, and you have to do administration, and you're expected to come up with creative ideas and publish them in the best journals, and then you spend so much time writing these papers, and then they get rejected, and then you realize, and then you hear from your head of department that if you don't have 5 publications by the end of the year, we will not prolong your contract. So you are under a considerable amount of stress, and too much stress risks killing creativity, because you end up not sleeping enough, and not going for walks, and not allow your brain to engage in the kind of deep thinking that you can get when, I don't know, you go walking in the forest and you're looking at a lake, and that's where an idea might hit you. So you need to create the conditions where you can be creative. And of course, publications matter. The career really depends on the publication list. So when I was in selection committees at Birkbeck, we would the threshold to be invited to an interview for a lectureship would typically be about 5 papers and maybe a couple of book reviews. That would be the kind of standard entry to get invited. And you need these few publications to convince the potential employer that you have research potential. I also think that it's better to have something than nothing. So it means that at the very start of your career, it's okay if you have some publications in conference proceedings. That's fine. I always recommended to my students also to write some book reviews, because that's a useful way to find your academic voice and have a line on your CV. Avoid publishing crap, meaning if you realize that what you have produced isn't very good, and you get advice from your supervisor telling you, that that's not really good material, then avoid publishing it. So I guess that if you want to become a researcher, you need a strategic plan, knowing what to publish, where, at what pace, and with whom. So how to get published? I would say it really depends on your research interests and on your field. So you need to know within that field what topics are hot. It's pretty easy if you go to a conference, or you look at the conference program of a recent conference. You check what topics are being discussed, and what seems to be creating buzz, because you don't want to start working and trying to publish something on a topic that is no longer considered cool or hot. It needs to be something that people are currently interested in, because that's what will land you a job at the point. So it's important also to create a network of people who have similar interests. So go to conferences, try to talk to the plenary speakers during coffee breaks or during the conference dinner, contact authors. If there is a paper out that you're interested in, but you can't access it, if you flatter them a little bit, they will typically send you the PDF. Also keep an eye out on calls for papers of conferences or special issues or edited books on the topic that you are interested in. So what to publish? It could be a small research project, pilot studies. I recommend all my PhD students, I have recommended that they try to turn the most interesting findings of their MA thesis or dissertation into a little publication. You could also publish a critical review of literature on a topic. There are plenty of journals that are interested in critical reviews. You could write some critical analysis of a popular concept or contribute to a discussion forum. And as I said before, book reviews are really a good way to get free books, and these books are typically very expensive. So what is you simply contact the reviews editor of a journal, tell him or her that you are a PhD student or a master's student with a huge interest in this topic, and that you notice that this expensive new book came out and that you would love to review it for the journal. And that typically implies writing 2,000 words, where you point out what you liked and what you didn't like much about the book. Don't be too harsh, because the author of that book may be your future employer, so you need to be careful. And then the book reviews editor will contact the editor and will send you a free copy of the book, and you typically have 3 months to write your book review. Then the other one is the standard research paper, typically between 6,000 and 12,000 words. There are also journals that have options for shorter papers, research in progress. So that's typically somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 words. And then there are also review papers where you write a review of a particular area in the field. So before writing, I would say that you need to you need to develop an intuition or a gut feeling that something is original and is worth investigating, and that you happen to be the best person to do it. And it's an intuition that you can typically discuss with your supervisor, because as supervisors, we are very happy when students come up with original ideas. And I have published many papers with former bachelor students or master students who came up with a really interesting idea. And I thought, oh, yeah, great. Let me supervise you properly, and let's make sure that we get good data. And then they got a good grade for their BA or master dissertation. But of course, these BA and master dissertations, even if they have high grades, they are not necessarily publishable. To turn a dissertation into a paper requires a lot of work. So we then turned it into papers, and they got published. So you need to formalize the intuition. You need to come up with a research design. You need to develop a hypothesis based on previous literature, on previous research. So you need a proper literature review. Then you collect the data. You, as I said before, you sort it, you analyze it, you see to what extent it confirms or disconfirms previous research. And what you do is really adding a grain of sand to the pyramid of knowledge. So I say that because we shouldn't be overambitious in the sense that the paper doesn't need to be revolutionary. It doesn't need to be the 10 commandments that Moses came down with from his mountain. It just needs to be one gleaming, beautiful, perfectly formed grain of sand, and you add that to the pyramid of knowledge, and you will have done your job. So it's good to assemble the data, all the data, before you start writing the paper. And I would say that when you write up the data, do it as if you were talking to colleagues. Then another question is whether you should go for co-authored or single publications. I would say that it depends on the field. In literature research, most papers are single authored. In social sciences, in applied linguistics, it's more common to see co-authored papers, typically between 2 and 5 authors. If you look at physics, for example, or exact sciences, STEM research, you sometimes see a list of 10 authors because they are all the members of the lab. So that is rather unusual in applied linguistics. It can be a great idea to co-author something with somebody who has more experience than you, because they know the ropes and they know how to react to sharp comments by reviewers, and they know that if a reviewer recommends something that you disagree with, that you have a right to disagree and explain why you disagree and why you will not follow the reviewer's recommendation. And you may even have to appeal to the editor, say, you know, reviewer 3 is asking me to drop this, but I really think this is crucial for this and this and this reason. And so it's important to learn the practices in publishing in applied linguistics. I like co-authoring because I like working with people who have skills that I don't have to the same extent. For example, I've been working with Eloise Botes and Chen Li, who have amazing statistical skills. They are psychometric specialists, so they can do things with stats that I couldn't do because I'm more self-taught statistician, and it's great. And then I help them write a good story and find some interesting metaphors. So finding the right journal, that's a crucial and difficult question. Do you go for the top journal or do you go for a lower ranked journal? Do you go for quantity or quality? And my recommendation would be to aim for balance, where you have some quick, I wouldn't say low level, in fact, but more intermediate level publications like conference proceedings, web-based journals. And then I would recommend spending a lot of time and energy to try and get at least one paper into a really prestigious journal, because future selection committees will look at your CV and will say, okay, some conference proceedings, some mid-level journals, but wow, one paper in a really good journal. And if you can do one, then the assumption is that you can do more. So I would also say, recommend that you send your best work to the best journals. So check whether the impact factor is high, whether you know the people who publish in that journal. Again, ask advice to supervisors. I would absolutely avoid non-referee journals unless it's reviews or opinion pieces. Also avoid edited volumes with editors that don't have a name in the field, or working with co-authors that you don't trust much, or you don't have much of a reputation unless they are your students, and avoid also volumes published by publishers that are so-called pirate publishers. There are a number of them, and you need absolutely to avoid publishing there. So again, that's something that you need to ask your supervisor. And then the other thing is that you probably need to avoid editors that work slowly, because if you're at the start of your career, you don't want to wait 2 or 3 years for a chapter to come out. So as I said, avoid predatory journal. Open access these days is becoming more common. Institutions typically pay to have the paper out in open access, but you need to avoid these so-called predatory journals. Be extremely careful. They typically contact you after you presented something at a conference, something that leaves a trace on the internet, and then you will get an invitation saying, you know, we noticed that you produced this magnificent, or that you presented this magnificent paper. We think you are brilliant. Now, will you please submit your paper in our journal? Run away, delete straight away, because if somebody flatters you, it's probably a scam. Because then there will be hidden payments, the quality will be crap, and it risks, in fact, undermining your academic credibility. So make sure you check where you submit your paper. Now, what to avoid in the paper, and I'm saying this because as editor, I come across about 800 papers a year submitted to my journal, and I would typically reject the ones that have very superficial literature reviews, where there is just some reference dropping, but there isn't any critical engagement with the studies presented. Also avoid claiming that very little research has been done in an area if you're not 100% sure. And it's hard to be 100% sure, because you can't know everything that has been published. And it could be the reviewer reading your paper who happened to have produced some research in that topic, and he or she will be angry with you for claiming that very little has been done. Also crucial to make sure that the text looks good. Sloppiness is dangerous. So make sure you stick to the style sheet of the journal, that the references are in the right format. Double check whether everything in the list of references is mentioned in the text and vice versa. Make sure the spelling of surnames is correct, because it really pisses a reviewer off if his or her surname is badly spelled. Also, avoid making sweeping generalizations. So always be very careful in discussing the results, because what applies to your particular data set might not apply to data sets collected from different participants in different environments. Also, avoid claims that cannot be substantiated, and avoid a rhetorical style that does not match that of the journal. I would add to that, avoid taking sides in whatever argument you are presenting. So you are writing an impartial paper. You are writing a paper on a topic. You cannot choose a position. So you're not writing a pamphlet to attack something or to defend something. You are looking at it with an impartial pair of eyes, and you may come to a conclusion that this is more correct than that, or that you prefer this to that, but the paper can not be written like it would be a pamphlet. So to get your paper accepted, it's crucial to keep it simple. So the story needs to be a specific story on one specific theme. So better to explain one idea in detail than too many superficially. And I would say that is a typical beginner's mistake. Beginner researcher want to cram in too many ideas. So my golden rule is less is more. So the one idea needs to be visible in the title, must come clearly through in the abstract, in the opening of the introduction, and again in the conclusion. So people get it, what the idea was. So also follow the style and the structure of papers published in the journal that you have in mind. And if you think, oh, this is also such a good idea, I could also put it in there. In fact, my advice is split it off, cut and paste it in a separate document, something that you can develop later. Try not to put too many eggs in the one basket. also think hard about the title when you finish the paper, because sometimes you start with a working title, and then at the very end of the paper, finishing the paper, you realize that in fact you need to revisit the title, because the idea may have shifted a little bit. You may have focused on one aspect rather than what you announced in the title, and the title really will determine whether or not your paper is cited. If it's too long, too clunky, it won't get much attention. So also having a catchy title is good, but there is no need to have a catchy title. But if you can come up with something catchy that gets people's attention, that would certainly help. Writing tips, I would say writing a good introduction. In fact, the first sentence is crucial. If you don't catch the attention of the reader and you don't convey the importance of the questions addressed in that first sentence, in that first paragraph, nobody is going to read the rest of the text. So I would say that I reject, again, papers submitted to my journal, if I read the introduction, well, I read the abstract and I read the introduction, and if halfway through the introduction I still don't know what this paper is about, I reject it, because they didn't catch my attention. So text can be written in the past or present tense. Past tense, okay, if you describe results of an experiment, but typically present tense if it's a general conclusion. Good to write, if you write in English, you need to write short sentences, shorter than you would if you were writing in French or Italian, for example. Also avoid fluffy, hermetic and complex ways of saying a simple thing. So I would say that the Anglo-Saxon requirement is really to not beat around the bush, be as clear and as simple as possible. Now I want to talk to you about something I find really interesting, which is comes from chaos theory and the dynamic systems theory, which is the butterfly effect. Namely, the fact that a new idea at some point in time may feel like nothing more than the flapping of wings. And I don't know whether you know this metaphor of the butterfly effect. It's the flapping of the wings of a butterfly today in Poznań may be linked to a storm in Italy in 2 weeks, because it could have unexpected consequences. And because the world is a dynamic system, you don't know exactly what the consequences will be, in our case, of a particular paper. So sometimes a paper gets published and doesn't get cited very much for a couple of years, and then suddenly there is growing interest in the area, and suddenly that paper may get started to be cited more and more, and you could say that you could say that that paper was in fact the butterfly, and that it had unexpected consequences or effects on the field. And so butterflies, you could refer to butterflies by famous researchers like Galileo, when he first published his rejection of the geocentric model, saying that the Earth circulates around the sun. Very few people believed him, and the church was very angry with him for making that claim, and in the end it turned out that he was right. Same with Einstein, who introduced relativity, again something that not many people believed could be true when it was first published, and then became the dominant paradigm in physics. And then I would also say that sometimes the butterflies can be political, and I'm thinking here about Tarek El-Tayeb Mohamed Bouazi, who was a modest street vendor, and he set himself on fire in 2010 in Tunisia. and it was an act that led to the Tunisian revolution. So the poor man was desperate and wanted to express his protest in that act of self-immolation, and that had consequences. So he was a kind of a butterfly. Now, another thing that I'm interested in is how research develops within sciences and how it develops within applied linguistics, and how that development is typically non-linear. And I recommend the book by Thomas Kuhn on the structure of scientific revolutions. So where he explains that science goes through paradigm shifts, where current theories can't explain some phenomenon, someone proposes a new theory. So I would say that when Galileo came in, he pointed out that the observations did not allow him to confirm the theory that Earth was the center of the universe. So more and more observations led to the rejection of the old geocentric model and the introduction of the new heliocentric model. So that was a typical paradigm shift. So this revolution occurs when the new paradigm is better at explaining the observations, offers a model that is closer to the objective external reality, and that the new paradigm is incommensurate with the old one. So examples of paradigm shifts in applied linguistics, if you are a master student in applied linguistics, you know that was behaviorism, that it ended, in fact, when Chomsky in 1959 reviewed Skinner's verbal behavior, and where Chomsky said, in fact, language is not a collection of reinforced habits, as the behaviorist claimed. Children use language creatively, so it was the death knell for behaviorism in applied linguistics at the time. Also, we have had contrastive analysis that was also inspired by behaviorism, seeing language as a set of habits, with second language acquisition being the establishment of new habits, where it was assumed that if there were errors in the second language, they were caused by the first language, and the prediction that the bigger the difference between a structure in the first and the second language, the more errors would occur in the second language. And then Zobel was among those who pointed out that French learners of English failed to show evidence of the predictor error, but English learners of French did. So in French, for those of you who know French, you can say je les vois. In English, you would have to put the object pronoun after the verb, so you would say I see them. However, looking at learner data, Zobel realized that French learners of English never said things like I them see, which would be the expected pattern, because then they would transfer their French syntactic pattern. Yet English learners of French did produce sentences like je vois elle instead of je la vois. So the interference didn't go in both directions. So the transfer of habits was not consistent across languages. Okay, so that was until now the general advice about doing research in applied linguistics and about the butterfly effects. And I would say that in a certain sense, we all have experienced butterfly effects, meaning that we have all done certain things that led us onto certain paths and that we could not have predicted where they would take us. So when I started my career, and so I will talk about these butterfly effects and these trigger events in my own career. I started doing a master's in French in Brussels, and I did my master's dissertation on a theoretical topic, namely a famous French linguist called Gustave Guillaume, and I managed to publish the findings of that dissertation in Travaux de Linguistique. And I was really into theoretical French linguistics at the time. But then once I started doing my PhD, it was a PhD in applied linguistics on the acquisition of French as a foreign language. And I kind of abandoned theoretical linguistics and became more interested in applied linguistics. And so my first applied linguistic paper appeared in '92, was on the omission of ne in French interlanguage. So that was in fact a combination of social linguistics and applied linguistics. And then I published my first papers in French, then realized that I would probably reach a wider audience if I wrote the papers in English, but my English wasn't that good, so I had to ask a friend to help me out. And so by 2000, I was writing in English, and I was interested there also in gender assignment and gender agreement in advanced French interlanguage. That was part of my PhD dissertation. And I also became interested in the use of colloquial words and emotional words and swear words in advanced French interlanguage. So I was still very much focused on French as a second language at the start of my career. And then I had critical incidents. So I encountered my colleagues when I joined Birkbeck in 1994. I realized that I had gaps in my social pragmatic competence in English. I was able to understand most of what my colleagues said, but I didn't always understand what they actually meant. So I understood the words, but I didn't always get what their emotions were and what they really meant. So I couldn't really read between the stiff upper lips of my colleague. And then I had a chat with an aunt of mine who worked in palliative care, and Else is her name. And she asked me, so what do you do? I said, oh, well, you know, I teach at the university and I do research, and I had just published, it was, the conversation happened in early 2001. And I said, you know, and I have had just this paper out on how learners of French agree gender sometimes, and sometimes they don't, and isn't that fascinating? And she looked at me and she said, so you are really splitting hairs. And I thought, oh, that's not very kind. But I laughed and I said, well, I guess so, yeah, but you know, it's my hobby and I get paid to do it, but it felt a bit lame. And then 9/11 happened. And I felt that suddenly, as applied linguists, there was an urgent need for us to promote peace, tolerance of diversity. In fact, the underlining the value of multilingualism and multiculturalism and positive thinking, and that it was our moral duty as applied linguists to do some good for society, that we needed to get out of our ivory towers. And so I left the ivory tower and met a huge amount of people. And there are a few names there. A picture there with Beverly Costa. We got an award for our work. Then bottom left is with Kazuya Saito, who's a great friend. And then in the middle, a picture with Peter McIntyre, Tammy Gregerson, Elaine Horitz, and Sarah Mercer, who became lifelong friends. And to the right there, holding the Distinguished Scholarship Award from AAAL, Aneta Pavlenko, surrounded by Peter de Costa and Lourdes Ortega. So all these people became really good friends. And I realized that one of my early papers really had an impact. We were among the first to introduce the word emotion in applied linguistics. So in a paper in 2002. And then Aneta and I realized that the emotion was really an interesting topic, that not much had been written about it, and that we could organize panels on emotions and multilingualism at different conferences, which is what we did in the early 2000s. And then based on these panels, we guest edited special issues in different journals. And so we attracted attention to the topic, and we invited colleagues to join us. And then we developed a follow-up study. We developed a bilingualism and emotion questionnaire, which was probably the first and the biggest online questionnaire in applied linguistics. It remained online for 2 years, collected data from over 1,500 multilinguals. And those of you who listened to my first talk remember that it was about language preferences to express emotions, also information on proficiency, on anxiety. And we found that the first language is typically preferred for communication of emotion, and is typically felt to have most emotional resonance. So once we had all those data, we published papers on that, and then we realized that we both had to publish a book on it, and that it would be more helpful to each have a separate book rather than to have a co-authored book. So Aneta published her book pretty soon in 2005, and then I published mine 5 years later, with a slightly different focus, and so mine was more had more statistics in it than Aneta. And you, I don't remember whether I told you that the face, the self-portrait on the cover of my book is in fact a painting that is hanging here in my office. It's a self-portrait by my maternal grandfather from 1933, and he was a passionate bilingual. So I thought, right, he's the perfect person, and this is the perfect cover for my book. And then in 2005, I was also among the first to call for more attention to psychological and emotional dimensions in second language acquisition research. And again, I didn't know at the time that that paper would get cited quite a lot. And then interest in emotion research started to develop more gradually in applied linguistics. It had been dominantly cognitive until the time, with a focus on observable and measurable units. And I had this chat with John Schumann, who's one of the founders of applied linguistics and professor of applied linguistics at UCLA in California. And he said, well, you know, it's about applied linguists wanting to make sure that they are taken seriously, that they are real scientists, so they use sophisticated statistics. So they can legitimately be considered as scientists. And he said emotions are probably less attractive because they have no observable physical referent in the world, and they fell outside of the traditional remit of second language acquisition. So the winds of change started to come with the introduction of more qualitative research in applied linguistics, where it suddenly became okay to look at the L2 learner's subjective side that included emotion, investment, duty, love, desire. And I refer here to the work by Claire Kramsch and Aneta Pavlenko. And I think I also reminded you during my first session about the metaphor about emotions being the elephant in the room, that everybody knows they are there, but they are not really taken into consideration because they are considered to be inferior to rational thought. And hopefully this change now with the prior saying that, yeah, there is an elephant, but it's time to open the windows and to move on. And so we have had the so-called emotional turn, and also the affective turn. In fact, I guess applied linguists and authors love to coin a nice new collocation linked to their name. So emotional term, affective term, they are good collocations. It shows that there suddenly is some kind of, maybe not paradigm shift, but mini paradigm shift. Also, I ran the Ngram viewer to look at the use of the word emotion in written text since the 1800s. And you see that there's been a sharp increase in the word emotion since the 1990s, really. So I would say that my interest in emotion and applied linguistics, in a sense, reflects an increased interest in that word and an increased use of that word across different disciplines, across different genres and styles. So I guess there is more publicity, ads that play on our emotions today than they would have 40 years ago. Also, although there wasn't much about emotion in applied linguistics, in fact, there were emotional journals in psychology, and these three journals were all established late 20th century, early of our current century. So you see that there was interest in emotion, that it typically started at that point, but it took a little while before it came into applied linguistics. And the introduction in Dornier and Ryan in 2015 is telling, in that the authors say that, of course, the classic individual differences paradigm in applied linguistics barely acknowledges the central role of emotions, and feelings and emotions play a huge part in all our lives. They have been shunned to a large extent by both psychology and second language acquisition literature. So there is a general emotional deficit, and they acknowledge that the 2005 version of their book reflected this trend. So it was an ongoing conversation I had with Zoltan and with Stephen Ryan, that emotion needed more attention, and why weren't they talking about emotion more? And so I was pretty happy in 2015 when they acknowledged that, yes, they should have talked more about emotion. And then I also realized that, of course, our research is spread over different fields, that in the social psychological research tradition, motivation researchers typically had included anxiety dimensions, but had never included positive emotion dimensions. If there were positive emotions, there were typically item level emotions like, I like my English class, but there wasn't a proper foreign language enjoyment dimension, for example. And most research on emotions had focused on foreign language classroom anxiety. Also, looking at applied linguistics, there is in fact only one journal, Journal for the Psychology of Language Learning, that has the word psychology in the title. And I also added the Journal of Language and Social Psychology, but that's in fact a psychological paper. So it's a social psychological journal. I talked to you in my second session about learner emotions and how the interest in learner emotions came after the introduction of positive psychology and applied linguistics, 2012 paper by Peter McIntyre and Gregerson, and then a 2014 paper also by McIntyre and Mercer about what positive psychology could bring to second language acquisition research. It was followed by two edited books, one edited in Poland by Danuta Gabris-Barker and her colleague Dagmara on positive psychology perspectives in foreign language learning and teaching, and also a book published by Multilingual Matters, edited by McIntyre, Gregerson, and Mercer on positive psychology in SLA. And the publication of these two books helped strengthen the growing interest in positive psychology, in learner emotions, and also later in teacher emotions. And then in my second session, I presented the paper that I co-authored with Peter McIntyre, The Two Faces of Janus, where we presented the concept of foreign language enjoyment. It's been my most cited paper. And then also with Chen Li, we published a paper in a Chinese journal, which I like, because we shouldn't just publish in international journals. We should also publish in national journals, where we talked about the four or the three phases of emotions, where they were first avoided because cognition was the only thing that mattered. Then the second phase, where there was interest in anxiety, including the work by Krashen on his affective filter hypothesis, and then Elena's Horitz foreign language classroom anxiety, and the phase we are currently in, which is a positive and negative emotions phase, thanks to the emotional turn and positive psychology, where we've taken a more holistic view on emotions and look at a variety of different emotions that learners and teachers may experience. So we conceptualized enjoyment as this complex positive emotion that occurs when people not just meet their needs, but exceed them, do something unexpected. You may remember that I cited the meta-analysis that showed that if you suffer from high anxiety in your classroom, you typically don't do as well. Whereas if you enjoy your foreign language classroom a lot, you are typically more willing to communicate, and you typically will have better results. So the pedagogical implication of that is that teachers can create an optimal positive atmosphere. Part of my research output has been the creation of new instruments, and those turned out to be highly cited, although we didn't really do it to get high citation. But if you develop a new instrument to do further research on a certain topic, they need to be solid. And so you see, I loved collaborating with Eloise Botes and Chen Li to do this. And then, you know, I don't want to read this out, obviously, but we did a lot of work on the sources and the effects of enjoyment, anxiety, and boredom, how that is linked to teacher behavior, how different positive personality traits are linked to willingness to communicate and to performance, how it's linked to trait emotional intelligence. We also looked at enjoyment in first language classes and discovered that it isn't that different from foreign language classes. And and then more recently, I did a couple of studies on teacher emotions, teachers who are forced to smile in front of a class when they don't feel like smiling because they are tired or stressed. And also the role of the teacher in front of the class, where through a process of emotional contagion, a happy teacher can make the whole classroom happy. An unhappy teacher can also infect everybody, and where everybody feels depressed. So as a teacher, you really need that emotional labor to keep a smile on your face and on the face of your students. And then with Priyati Ergun, we looked at the link between well-being, resilience, and foreign language teaching enjoyment. So that's another interesting concept. So what makes a teacher enjoy his or her teaching, and to what extent is it linked to teacher internal variables like well-being and resilience. And then I did a lot of work thanks to a PhD student of mine on emotion recognition. So how do we recognize how a multilingual feels when we watch or an audio when we watch a video recording or when we listen to an audio recording. And this turns out to be an area of research that really caught my attention. And it was thanks to this PhD student, Pernelle Lorette, and a number of other lovely colleagues. And then I think also in my first lecture that I mentioned how my interest in emotion developed into the more specific context of multilingualism in psychotherapy, where we discovered that very often multilingual clients feel that their multilingualism and multiculturalism is not sufficiently addressed in therapy, and that there are also differences between monolingual and multilingual therapists in how they deal with their clients, and that research won us an award from the British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy. So it was clear that we had been doing something original that had practical implications, and the practical implications, we worked on them trying to raise awareness about multilingualism and the issues that this implies for the psychotherapist, and we published a couple of papers on that topic. Also, thanks to Beverly Costa, we try to disseminate our findings to a larger audience. And Beverly Costa, not only did she train about 3,000 trainee therapists in a program called Improving Access to Psychological Therapists in the UK, training also a clinical supervisor, but she also had the brilliant idea to hire an established author to turn our research findings and her case notes into a play. So Andrew Weir wrote The Session, based on an original idea by Mother Tongue, and it's about a Polish woman married to a British man, and they have communication problems, and he doesn't value her cultural background enough, and there is some trauma about a child, and so it was performed at the Soho Theatre, and about 3,000 people came to see that play. And so the play was really about the issues that we had found in our research, and that was a nice way to disseminate the findings. Also, our research had an impact in that the British Association for Counsellors and Psychotherapists clearly added the importance of being aware of unconscious linguistic bias, assumptions, and privilege if you work with multilingual clients. The crucial need to offer linguistically sensitive supervision, acknowledging the role of language in identity development, processing of trauma, memory recall, and emotional expression. So that was in fact clearly linked to the work I had been doing with Beverly Costa, and that applies to the UK, but it implies, in fact, it applies to other contexts also, of course. So to conclude, I would say that research doesn't emerge in a vacuum, that emotion research emerged against the odds, but was kind of inevitable, that intense academic socialization, collaboration leads to joint development and new ideas. I think it really helps to write in English to reach a wider audience. I think it's also crucial to talk to people from neighboring disciplines for cross-fertilization, and that doing research is just fantastic. It's exhilarating, intoxicating, unpredictable, and I would say that it is absolutely worth the effort. And because there were so many words, I want to finish with some pictures. So the top left picture, you will recognize the face of Zoltan Dornier at a conference dinner in Graz in 2014, and beneath that is Zhu Hua, who's sitting on the floor during a AAAL conference, being in a packed room and being a bit tired. And at the bottom left there, I was at an emotion conference with my then current PhD and former PhD students. And then the other pictures, again, walking, going to conferences, having dinners, and top right is my friend Li Wei giving a plenary at conferences, meaning what I'm saying here is that research happens because you are collaborating with absolutely lovely people. And if somebody turns out not to be lovely, you just drop them and you work with the ones that you appreciate and that keep their word and that have the integrity and honesty and friendship. And if they can bake banana breads when you go to a conference and they give you a bit of banana bread, that's even better. That's a hint because that's what Jakub did at the last Euroslav conference. So many thanks, and I hope you will have some questions for me.
Encouraged by all means, and the priority goes to the people in the room. You know that you can approach this place anytime. You are not seen because the camera is off. So all you need is a bit of courage. We had that happen before. So if you think of asking a question, now is the perfect opportunity. First of all, the people in the hall. Especially those people who are thinking of doing perhaps further research in applied linguistics.
I can see that there is a question in the chat.
Right. Let's deal with it.
Yes, let me start with the first.
Hello, Jean-Marc. Can you hear me?
Okay, go ahead, Jacek.
It's Jacek Rysiewicz. I decided to write a question, or not a question, but a comment. So if you don't mind, I will just read those out. So sure. I have two comments to make. First of all, I'd be cautious to to advise young scholars in the first half of your lecture here to better publish something than nothing, even though you immediately downplayed this with the recommendation not to publish crap. What I think is that, unfortunately, in the majority of cases, the urge and the pressure on young people to publish and the imperative to do so, especially nowadays in what I call mass university culture, where we have dozens and dozens and dozens of PhD students taking interest in second language acquisition, first language acquisition, God knows what. Okay, and they are really pressed. Maybe not that pressed in Poland as they are in your country or in the West in general. So this leads to, unfortunately, this something that is better than nothing. It leads to this something being of rather low, both intellectual as well as methodological piece of pseudo research.
Yeah.
My second comment
can
is...
I answer the first one first?
Okay.
So when I say something is better than nothing, I meant, in fact, book reviews. Write book reviews and write them for good journals. So because writing a book review might not be what you originally would love to have, which is a research paper, but I would argue that that is the crucial first step. Write a couple of book reviews, and after that, you will have acquired the skills to write research papers. So don't run before you can walk, I would say.
Okay. Although on this point, I would also disagree with you. I can't, frankly speaking, I can't somehow imagine a beginning PhD student to write, let's say, a review of Dörnay, Zoltan Dörnay, The Psychology of Language Learner book review, with, well, this little experience in research, very little experience in methodology, in teaching, in what really the job is about. The review, okay, the review might be a kind of review which a student might be encouraged to present in his seminar or something, but I would be very cautious to advise this for him to publish this, because I mean, this is my opinion. Okay.
I agree with you that writing a really good book review is difficult, but it is feasible for someone who's starting a PhD because it shows an ability to synthesize. So they need to say, okay, this book has 3 parts. It's a part about this, it's a part about that, it's a part about that. So that is not too difficult, right? If you have a master's, you can do this. And then the final part, then you don't need to have huge research experience to say that you really enjoyed this and that you felt the author could have said more on that and that. And so you don't say anything obviously wrong, or anyway the reviews editor would say, well, you know, you're a bit too negative, or maybe you're a bit too positive, or maybe you should do a bit of that. So you get some feedback, but it's not too hard to produce a book review if you don't have too much research experience. But of course, I mean, we could discuss this further over a glass of beer.
It's a huge topic, but I would like to comment here too. So my case, my story is a bit different. And I think there are quite a few people like me who did their PhD not as young people, but in my case, after about 20 years of teaching experience. And for me, conceptualizing a topic, in my case, how to facilitate self-regulated learning in a foreign language classroom, was a kind of literature review. I did not use any data. And I also did that, like some other reviews, first, because I was at the very early stage of my career, and second, we had the COVID pandemic. So there was a limited opportunity to produce any sort of research. So I just published to publish something. I'm not fully happy with the publication, because there is also this thing that, you know, year after year, you become more critical of your own work, which I think is quite natural. But I think it's not wasted effort. So I had to think, I had to conceptualize it. It had a revolving theme, and it also gave me an opportunity to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say there is some positive thing about writing reviews.
Yeah.
So we have one more comment and question from Dr. Rusiewicz. Go on.
So my second point is about the neglect of affect. So I don't think that affect has been, I'll just read through this, has been neglected in second language acquisition, at least not from Krashen's affective filter theory. I think that the problem with the affective factors is not that the effects are unobservable, as you said, but that they are difficult to operationalize and tease out from the intricate interplay of the whole array of emotional influences that are at play in second language acquisition. Consequently, the relative difficulty of identifying the affective effects in second language acquisition, following the difficulty in their operationalization, leads an ever-increasing number of young scholars to fall victim to some pre-scientific and straightforwardly bogus ideas which have been flying around for decades in second language acquisition, and particularly in teacher training, okay? And here, I mean, ideas like multiple intelligences, for example, flow by Csikszentmihalyi, okay, matching learning styles with instruction, NLP, neurodidactics, the preoccupation with totally unresearchable ideas, unoperationalizable ideas like boredom and so on. And this simply takes the whole attention of the real factors involved in second language acquisition, which are researchable to those on which scholars can sort of float without really doing anything serious in that matter. This is my comment, Jean-Marc. Okay?
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, I've been always critical of this kind of things. Okay, what do you say about that?
My reaction is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That yes, of course, there are things that are over the top in second language acquisition research, as in any area of research, and that you need to discern what is useful and what isn't. I mean, that's your responsibility as a researcher. I kind of smile because you don't like flow, and I just inserted a reference to a paper that came out in Applied Linguistics earlier this week on flow, and I talked about it in my session. I don't think flow is a useless concept. I think it's a very, very interesting concept. Now,
absolutely.
The thing is,
it's a metaphor. This is a metaphor.
Well, no, it describes something, but sometimes you can describe things that aren't necessarily always directly measurable, in the sense that although in fact in the paper we do refer to neuro research that shows that specific areas of the brain are in fact more heavily involved when people reach a flow state. So this is not esoteric stuff. This is based on solid science. The answer to the interest in affect, in fact, in a 2019 paper published in the Modern Language Journal, I checked how often the word emotion and affect had been used in the Modern Language Journal on average, and it turned out that before 2010, it was like an average of 8.5 times a year that word had been used. After 2010, it went up sharply. It went, I think, to 25 times. Also, before 2010, whenever there was talk of affect or emotion, it was anxiety. After 2010, that range increased. So there is definitely increased interest in emotion. And I totally agree with you that we need to avoid bogus ideas. And there are bogus ideas, things like the lizard brain and stuff. But I think we need to be both critical, but also courageous in trying to do solid research in areas where other people may have had doubts. So can you address the doubts? Can you convince them that this is solid, that you can actually measure this, that people will agree with you? Can you get your stuff published in the top journals? If you can, that's a kind of a validation that flow is not just a bogus idea.
Okay. Thanks. I enjoyed your lecture. Hopefully we'll see each other in Styrk again.
I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
Cheers. Right. Thank you very much, both of you. I think slowly time comes for a bit of roundup. So I'm going to rely on my notes. I really liked this metaphor. I don't know how it is with you guys, but metaphors work with me. So I like being able to holding to a metaphor, and I really like this one about the grain of sound which you add to the pyramid of knowledge. So you actually build something huge. And then when I was working with my boss, Professor Wiśniewska, on a very recent paper, I used another one, which is in a way similar, because that was about self-regulation in the use of linguistic landscape. And self-regulation is in general about being able to use endless opportunities to learn worldwide, and you spot the world as the endless stock of knowledge. And the first and most basic form of self-regulation is choosing the opportunity you want to learn from. So I think a lot of people are attending these lectures, and I'm looking at the people in the hall, but also relating to the people online, have used this opportunity a lot. And I think it was a very wise choice, using the opportunity of having Jean-Marc with us. I would also like to say that, okay, my boss has already mentioned one conference in 2025, to which she has invited Jean-Marc as a plenary speaker, and we'll be honored indeed if he appears. But there is another one, so I can officially say that we as the Institute of Applied Linguistics are going to apply for the organization of the Psychology and Language Learning and Teaching Conference 2026. So we're going to go for the organization, and hopefully we can also meet here for that conference. Before that, I'm pretty sure we're going to see each other in Madrid in May. So there will be time to talk about that too. To round up, thank you very much for all your talks, very inspirational, and thank you very much indeed for being with us, and looking forward to seeing you again, Jean-Marc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you all, and I wish you all well in your academic careers. And it was a bit strange to be only online, but I'm looking forward to being in Poznan again at some point.
Right, thank you very much indeed, and looking forward to seeing you here in the future in person.
Thank you, and hello, Camilla. Good to see you in person.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
A
Thank
pleasure.
you. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.